Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. America's Death Valley gets its name from the fact that it has the highest air temperature ever measured anywhere on Earth. Many travelers have died in this area because they were not ready for how dangerous it was. When living in such a harsh place, come with us as we look at one. What a sad story. Mikey has been bugging me to try the Death Note series since I'm probably one of the few people who have never seen it. I saw the movie a long time ago, but I never got around to seeing the TV show. When I recently tried to watch it, I was sad to find that it wasn't even on Netflix in my country. But if I go to Surfshark and switch to an Argentinian server, problem solved. Go to surfshark.deals/bedtime stories to get an amazing deal on one of the best VPNs on the market. Dave Brenner got to the main gate of the airfield before the sun was fully up, but he had to get going early because of what he had to do that day. This morning, the park ranger was told to look for what were thought to be drug labs in his area. With the most up-to-date intelligence reports in hand, he was determined to finally find out where they were. After agreeing on the search pattern over a cup of coffee that was quickly drained, Brenner waited for the pre-flight checks to be done before the military helicopter finally took off into the dawn sky. He put the map on his knee and told the pilot to head south toward Willow Spring, where the steep slopes and thick vegetation would make it easy to hide anything illegal. After a few unsuccessful passes over the area, Brenner asked his pilot to head east towards a place called Anvil Canyon, which was a few miles away. As the helicopter followed the path of the water as it gently flowed through the landscape below, Brenner continued to scan the ground. It was frustrating that there was no obvious sign of wrongdoing on the ground, but his attention was suddenly drawn to bright sunlight glinting off something on the ground. A few seconds later, the helicopter's nose turned around and slowly moved toward the source of the reflection he could see through his binoculars. The park ranger soon saw a green passenger van sitting in the canyon wash right below the hovering plane. Even though he was a little disappointed, Brenner asked the pilot to drop him off close by, even though the vehicle's presence was against the law meant to protect the park's natural beauty. It wasn't even close to the complicated criminal plan he was looking for. But as he got closer to this mysterious vehicle, he felt more and more uncomfortable. The California licensed Plymouth Voyager van was buried in the sand up to its axles. 3 of the car's 4 tires were flat, and there were signs that they had been driven in this condition for a while. There was nothing that looked like a main road for miles, so it's hard to imagine how it could have gotten off track. Only a brave or desperate driver would have tried to drive over this rough terrain in such a bad car. When Brenda found that the car was empty and locked, she quickly wrote down the license plate and ran back to her waiting car, where she climbed back in. He hoped that the rest of the day would have more interesting things happen. He didn't know it yet, but he was already caught up in a mystery that would never be solved. 25 years after that, when Dave Brenner and his co-workers did their first checks in the morning of October 21, 1996, they found that the car he had found abandoned in the middle of Death Valley National Park had been reported stolen 3 months earlier. It belonged to a Los Angeles-based rental company, and the police were called 30 days after the agreed-upon date when it was supposed to be returned but wasn't. When I asked the rental company more about what happened, I got a very scary picture of what had happened. The last person to rent the missing vehicle was a tourist from another country. He picked up the minivan on the morning of July 8, a day after he and his fellow travelers landed at Los Angeles International Airport. Egbert Rimkus was a German engineer who was on vacation with his 11-year-old son Georg in the United States. He was no longer with his ex-wife, who was with him. His girlfriend Cornelia Meyer and her 4-year-old son Max went with him on his trip. At the time Rimkus picked up the Voyager, he couldn't show the company a valid license, so Meyer was put in charge of driving for the rest of the holiday. The group was staying in the San Clemente area of Southern California, where they seemed to have had a great time as tourists. Rimkus tried to get more money from his bank in Dresden on July 12, but the transaction did not go through. The following week, he sent his ex-partner a fax asking for the same thing, but this time it didn't work either. The four people checked out of their hotel early on July 22 and drove across the border of Death Valley National Park. A week later, when Robert's ex-wife found out that they had not taken the flight back to Frankfurt that had been booked, she contacted the German authorities. On the 14th of August. After that, an official Interpol alert was sent out saying that the family is missing. Now that the missing minivan had been found, the American police moved quickly to help. More park rangers, with help from the local sheriff's office, went back to the abandoned car and started searching the area. Other than a few food wrappers, they didn't find much of interest. There were no obvious footprints or signs of a disturbance, so they had nothing to show for their efforts. First search. The search was then made more thorough by using tracker dogs and helicopters to look mostly in the area east of the minivan. It was thought that the missing tourists would have gone in this direction if their car had broken down. Other than some discarded drink containers that seemed to match others found inside the vehicle and signs that a group of people may have rested 2 miles east of where the Voyager was found, there were no other clues. Checks of the different tourist sites and guest houses in the park didn't turn up any new information about what happened to the missing family. But they did find several clues that helped with the investigation. The group went to the Furnace Creek Visitor Center on July 22 and bought a map in German at the park. The next day, they signed the visitor's book at a geologist's cabin in Warm Springs Canyon, which suggests they camped out next to their car the night before. This was done despite 2 helicopters and more than 50 people looking for them. There was no sign of the 4 tourists who were lost. There were many colorful and strange theories about what would happen to them, with varying degrees of plausibility. Some news stories said that they might have been killed by strangers they had met by chance. Charles Manson and his followers used to go to the park to do their work without the authorities watching them. Could this have been a time when history seemed to repeat itself? People thought they might have faked their deaths to get away from a danger in their home country and start a new life in the United States. But the strangest theory was that Egbert was an undercover agent working for the German government. He had used his vacation as a cover to spy on American weapons facilities. Both the famous Area 51 facility and the China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station are within a 2-hour drive of the national park. Since Egbert had worked on hybrid propulsion systems in his home country, rumors started to spread that he had hacked into American weapons facilities. But it took 13 long years before anyone found out what happened to the missing Germans, and the new information didn't solve the mystery. Instead, it just made people sad and raised more questions. As time went on, the story of the Germans who went missing turned into a legend. But for some members of the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit, the fact that they didn't solve the mystery is still something of a black mark on the otherwise perfect reputation of their team. The original rescue effort to find Egbert and his family was looked at and re-evaluated over and over again in case something had been missed. Tom Mahood and Leigh Walker were 2 of the team members who did this. The answer to solving the riddle potentially lay in the most unlikely of directions. They were sure that they had tried everything to find the family to the east of the minivan. The 2 people started to think that the rescuers should have been looking to the south. Whilst some speculated that the minivan's presence in such a remote and inaccessible part of the national park added credence to the theory that the family had been murdered and their vehicle concealed by the offenders, Mahoud came to a very different conclusion, a hypothesis which took into account Anvil Canyon's topography in relation to the surrounding area. On the day the family went missing, the temperature at ground level in Death Valley was close to 51 degrees Celsius. However, The temperature dropped by about 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet in altitude. Mahood thought that Rimkus had gotten lost in the park and realized that he and his friends were not prepared to survive the deadly heat. So, he drove the minivan to the highest point he could find. Unfortunately, the rental vehicle was not made for driving in such a place. But Mahoud thought that Egbert had kept driving until the Voyager's flat tires made it sink into the sand. Egbert may have looked at his map and seen that the China Lake military facility to the south was the closest point of reference. However, unlike smaller military installations back in Europe, which had regular perimeter patrols and CCTV systems, the sprawling nature of the American naval base was seen as its main protection, so huge parts of the fencing were not patrolled. Mohammed thought that the family must have died while looking for or trying to get to the base. And this area was where their bodies would be found. After searching for a few days in the area they had planned to look, Mujahideen Walker found a pile of personal items on November 12, 2009, in the morning. After finding identity papers and food containers that had been left behind for a long time, the two men found what looked like a pile of human bones at the base of a nearby cliff. When these remains were first found, it was thought that they had been out in the elements for so long that they were too bleached and worn down to provide any DNA evidence. But 4 months later, forensic scientists were able to say for sure that the bodies found were those of Egbert, Rimkus, and Cornelia Meyer. However, there is still no sign of their two missing sons. The fact that Tom Mahood and his colleague were able to find Rimkus's final resting place after so many failed attempts before gives a lot of weight to his theory about how the couple died. However, this theory is still being questioned by the fact that the children's bodies have not been found. It seems impossible that the couple would have chosen to be separated from their children in such a harsh and dangerous environment. If the two boys had died from dehydration or an accident, it seems just as unlikely that the adults would have just moved on and left them where they died because Egbert was supposedly working on secret engineering projects back in his home country. Some people might think again, that he was using the other tourists as a cover to spy on American military research programs. In reality, a closer look at his work shows that he was mostly involved with the kind of hybrid technology that is now commonplace in the auto industry and nothing more sinister. The idea that the couple was trying to disappear to start a new life also doesn't make sense. Both of them had plans for their personal and professional lives when they came back from America, and nothing has ever been found in their everyday lives that would have made them want to find a way out of where they were. Death Valley is still one of the most mysterious places in North America, and many strange things happen there. Over the years, people have noticed that rocks slowly move across the valley floor on their own, leaving long trails in the sand. This was a mystery that wasn't solved until recently. There have also been reports of strange metallic noises that seem to come from inside the constantly moving sand dunes. There have also been many reports of UFOs moving through the night sky and following the edges of the nearby military facilities. There have been a number of other unsolved disappearances in the vast and desolate area, which has led some people to compare it to the case of the missing 411 theories of David Collider's. Could it be that the Rimkus party's disappearance isn't just a case of bad luck? Even though America's wide open spaces, like Death Valley National Park, are very beautiful places, their size also makes them very dangerous places, and people who go there to find peace and solitude are often hurt or killed. Instead, they find that they can't go back to their friends and family. No matter what the real reason was for Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer's deaths, it is hard to look past how sad their situation was. There are still no answers about what happened to their children, and each year that goes by, the hope that more information will come to light fades. Our hearts go out to the families of these 4 people, and we still hope very much that telling their stories and those of others like them will help. Authorities or other interested parties may look into these cases again in the future so that the many unanswered questions can finally be put to rest. Some people thought that the minivan's location in such a remote and inaccessible part of the national park gave more weight to the idea that the family had been killed in their vehicle while the killers hid.